What's up, guys? It's Graham here, and you better prepare for what's about to happen. Believe it or not, for the first time since the Great Financial Crisis, the housing market is going through a total reset. Except this time, it could permanently change who gets to own a home and who gets locked out forever. That's because last week, Morgan Stanley warned that we're soon about to see a brand new housing market, where mortgage rates stay higher, affordability fails to recover, inventory remains locked, and prices never fall enough to save the average homebuyer. Meaning, the crash everyone's been waiting for might not ever happen, and by the time they realize it, the opportunity to buy might already be gone. That's why we really got to break down exactly what's happening, why the housing freeze could get significantly worse throughout the rest of the year, and then most importantly, what this actually means for you. Because if Morgan Stanley is correct, the most dangerous phase of housing prices may have already begun, and the scariest part isn't what's happening today. Instead, it's what's happening next. Although before we start, if you appreciate me financially doom scrolling on your behalf, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like button or subscribed if you haven't done that already. Yes, I keep saying it in every video. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it does actually help out the channel. And as a thank you for doing that though, here's a picture of a zebra. So thanks so much, and also big thank you to SoFi for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, so there's a bit of a backstory. In terms of what's happening in 2026 and what Morgan Stanley predicts for the future, we need to talk about the current state of the housing market. And that all begins with the housing freeze. See, Morgan Stanley periodically releases their home price forecasts about twice a year based on their analysis of the data, trends, and prices. And their latest findings were rather surprising. Like in terms of their newest research, they no longer believe the housing market is breaking in the sense that we'll see a 2008-style crash, but rather the housing market's going to enter a brand new reset where prices just keep going higher and then just stay there. After all, as of now, the 30-year mortgage is almost at 6.5%, which surprisingly is already at a 7-week low. Meanwhile, the median home price just hit $429,000, which is up another 1.3% from a year ago. And to top it all off, housing affordability is not getting any better. In fact, it's only getting worse, all thanks to what Morgan Stanley is calling the lock-in effect. Look, it's no surprise, as of right now, roughly 70% of homeowners have a mortgage rate below 5%, and half have a mortgage rate below 4%. This means there's no incentive whatsoever for someone to give up their sub 4% mortgage and exchange it for one that's going to cost them 50% more, when they could just stay put instead. And that's exactly what's happening. Really, until rates drop back down, the housing market is frozen. Nobody wants to move. Housing can't be built fast enough to satisfy demand, and that means that everything else on the market keeps going up in price despite being unaffordable for the vast majority of people. In fact, housing turnover is now at the slowest it's been in 40 years, and this has remained completely unchanged for 11 straight quarters. That is why we have this weird paradox where demand is weak because homes are unaffordable, but supply is equally as weak because no one wants to give up their cheap mortgage. So the two just kind of cancel each other out. And instead of a crash, home prices just keep going up higher, where most people patiently wait for prices to drop. But unfortunately, that's not expected to happen anytime soon. All because of something that most people don't expect, and that would be the affordability trap. Believe it or not, a few days ago, Harvard just released their own warning about the recent housing price appreciation trend, and it basically just confirmed everyone's worst-case scenario. That's the fact that the housing market is completely Okay, now, in all seriousness, even though Morgan Stanley is warning that the housing market is resetting financially, Harvard's research suggests something a lot deeper, which is that the current state of the housing market that most Americans grew up believing may have only been a one-time exception and not the rule, and that home prices were only ever designed to keep getting more expensive and more expensive and more expensive. Why? Well, just keep in mind that when all of this started after World War II, you had 16 million veterans all coming back at the exact same time. And Washington was genuinely terrified. So how do you quietly reabsorb so many people back into quiet, stable, civilian life without things getting out of control? Well, you guessed it. The answer with this was to give them a house. The conditions, after all, were perfect. You had cheap land, cheap debt, massive government support, fast construction, rising wages, and millions of people coming home who needed jobs, families, and stability. So the solution to this was what's known as the GI Bill. With this, veterans could buy homes with little to no money down, with low interest rate debt, and federally backed by the US government. While at the same time, the country was building suburbs, roads, schools, businesses, and entire communities around that new way of life to prevent the country from falling into disrepair. And it worked. As we've all seen, millions of people bought houses, started families, and adjusted to civilian life. But unfortunately, those conditions only lasted for a few decades. And today we have the exact opposite. Mortgage rates are higher, construction is slower, zoning is tighter, insurance is more expensive, wages have not kept up with prices, and instead of housing becoming easier to access over time, it's becoming more dependent on whether or not your family already owns those assets to begin with. That's why Harvard's warning is so important. because homeownership is starting to behave less like something people earn through income and more like something passed down through inheritance. And if that's true, Morgan Stanley's reset isn't just about rates, prices, and inventory. It could be that our entire housing market is shifting from those who are able to work their way in to a system where you already have the help, already own, or you're forced just to fall further and further behind. So in terms of what this means for the next few years, when prices might actually begin to come back down, and then most importantly, what you could do about this, here's what you came for. Because what they're predicting is pretty much the exact opposite of what most people expect. Although before we go into that,